The rain was so thin it felt like breath on my skin, barely enough to beat on my jacket as I stood on the bank of the Douve. Summer 1944, though nothing about that morning felt like summer. The river slid past in a slow, quiet curl, brown and indifferent, as if the war were a rumor carried from some other country. Even the old stone bridge ahead of me, cracked, moss-eaten, sagging under its own age, seemed to pretend that the artillery thunder rolling in from the beaches meant nothing. The distant rumble from Utah and Omaha reached us like a memory, muffled and uncertain. I remember thinking how ordinary it all looked, how a man could stand right here and believe the whole world had paused. Muddy fields. A few lonely cows somewhere in the mist. The soft plink of rain against my helmet. If a stranger walked up beside me, he might think I had wandered off from my unit and stopped here for a smoke. But I wasn't lost. I knew what the map said. I knew what the planners had whispered in the last briefings before we boarded the C-47s. And I knew what every river crossing in Normandy meant in these days after the landings. Maybe the others didn't think about it, but I did. This quiet little place was the hinge on which the whole invasion could swing open or slam shut. If German armor rolled through here, if the Panthers and Mark IVs slipped across this water and pushed toward the beachhead, the landings could choke in blood and steel. If we held this bridge, if we blew the others, if we kept the enemy divided and crawling, then the invasion lived. I stood there listening to the river and felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. A calm moment with catastrophe crouched beneath it. Just another bridge, some men had joked days before. Not to me. Not anymore. To get to that bridge, the war had to build me first. People later like to say it all began with the filthy 13, as if we'd stepped out of a comic strip with tomahawks and war paint. That's a pretty picture, but it's not where it started. It started long before Normandy, back in dust and hunger and silence. Back in the Great Depression when I learned what it meant to be broke, angry, and too stubborn to quit. I grew up watching men lose farms, watching families pack everything they owned into a truck and disappear down the road. When you see enough of that, fear changes shape. You stop being afraid of dying and start being afraid of wasting your one shot at doing something that matters. By the time the army got hold of me, I wasn't polished, but I was already hard. They said I didn't fear God or the devil. Maybe that was true. I respected storms and machinery more than I respected authority. Orders were negotiable. Results weren't. Airborne came to us wrapped in legend. We'd all heard about the German Fallschirmjäger, the paratroopers who dropped out of the sky in Holland and Crete, seizing airfields and bridges before anyone knew what had happened. The brass wanted their own shock troops, their own men who could jump into the dark and turn chaos into an ally. So they built airborne out of volunteers and lunatics. Men willing to step out of a door at 800 feet at night into gunfire in the unknown. Getting those wings was simple on paper and brutal in practice. Hundreds lined up. Most never finished. You ran until your lungs burned and your legs turned to wood. You climbed, crawled, fought, and rolled until the world blurred. They broke you down to see what stayed standing. And at the final step, they marched you to the edge of an open door and told you to jump into a black hole full of wind. 10 out of 1,000, that's what they said. Most washed out or were gently pushed. The rest of us learned something in that long second between leaving the aircraft and feeling the jerk of the chute. You either owned your fear or it owned you. I didn't care about shining boots or perfect salutes. I cared about getting to the fight, about doing something sharp enough to leave a mark. That attitude didn't make me popular with every officer, but it attracted a certain kind of man. The kind who hit back first. The kind who broke rules when the rules got in the way. That's how the filthy 13 started. Out of misfits the army should have thrown out, except we were too damn useful when things went bad. The plan looked beautiful on paper, the kind of clean, geometric thing staff officers love to admire. 20 of us would drop behind German lines, scatter toward the smaller bridges over the Douve, blow them clean, then pivot to seize the main crossing and hold it until the larger airborne waves arrived. Weather permitting, surprise guaranteed, resistance minimal. Those were the comforting lies written in ink. And for a while in England it felt almost possible. We trained hard and moved harder. We shaved our heads into mohawks, smeared our faces with paint, and let the newspapers take their pictures. People called us savages and maybe that suited us. The officers thought the image would put fear into German hearts. Truth was, we simply enjoyed giving the world something honest. We looked the way war felt. When the C-47s lifted off into the June night, engines drumming like giant fists under the wings, I felt that old familiar calm settle in my chest. I remember tightening the straps on my chute, checking my knife twice, then leaning toward the open door to breathe the cold wind. Everything seemed under control. Below us, Normandy slept in darkness. Ahead, the river waited. The plan was simple, I kept telling myself. We had done worse. Then the sky tore open. Flak blossomed around us like black flowers bursting out of nothing. The aircraft jolted, metal shrieking. I smelled burning insulation, felt hot fragments spray the inside of the fuselage. Men shouted, some praying, some cursing. Our official commander slumped in his harness, blood pouring from his shoulder. Someone yelled that Piccadilly Willie Green's chute had been hit, shredded before he even reached the door. Another explosion punched through the wing, and the aircraft banked so hard I slammed against the bulkhead. Half the men never made it out. Those of us who did were thrown into a whirling storm of tracer fire and drifting parachutes. The earth came up fast, too fast. I hit the ground hard enough to see a flash of white behind my eyes, rolled through wet grass and lay still, listening for footsteps. Nothing. No voices. No code words. No familiar crack of an M1. Just wind and distant artillery. When I finally stood, brushed mud from my face and checked my compass, the truth settled in my gut like a stone. I was 8 miles off target, alone in enemy country with no idea who had survived. The illusion of a clean operation had died in the air above me. The night swallowed me as I started moving, rifle low, boots sinking into the wet fields. I half expected to run into a German patrol with every step, but instead I found the first sign of life in the dark. A single Garand shot, sharp and deliberate, the way we'd agreed to signal friendlies. I froze, listened, then answered with my own. Moments later, shadows emerged from the hedgerow, 3 paratroopers, faces streaked with mud and fear, none from my original stick. They didn't know where their units were either. In that moment, rank didn't matter. We were just men trying not to die alone. By dawn, the trickle of survivors grew. Scattered troopers, 101st, 82nd, even a few stray pathfinders, found one another like magnets pulling from miles apart. We moved in small squads, cutting through hedgerows, probing farm lanes, ambushing German patrols. Every shot echoed too loudly in the still morning air. The bridges over the smaller channels of the Douve came first. Charges were planted quickly, wires checked twice. When each one went up, thunder cracking over the fields, we felt the enemy's arteries tighten. German reinforcements would have to crawl, not run. The main bridge was a different beast. By the time we reached it, the sun was sinking behind low clouds and the mud along the banks clung to our boots like tar. We dug into the earth, carving shallow foxholes, stacking sandbags stolen from a farmhouse, lining the approaches with barbed wire we found rolled in a shed. German pressure built by the hour, probing bursts of fire, mortar shells whining through the air, voices barking across the river. Our numbers were thin, maybe 40 men stretched across too much ground, but adrenaline made us giants for a little while. Then came the worst twist of all. On the third day, after we had beaten back wave after wave of attacks, the sky suddenly filled with the growl of engines. American aircraft. At first, relief washed over us, help at last. But the relief curdled when the planes banked hard in Dove. Someone screamed for us to take cover. Bombs fell like fistfuls of burning stone, smashing the bridge we had fought so bitterly to hold. Wood splintered, metal twisted, and flame rolled over the water. Our own side, thinking we had been wiped out, had come to finish the job for us. When the smoke cleared, the bridge was gone, and yet somehow we were still there, blackened, shaken, half buried in dirt, but alive. I remember crawling out of my foxhole, ears ringing, seeing only fragments of the world as if through cracked glass. Around us, the Douve hissed with falling debris. The mission was technically accomplished, but the cost pressed on us like a hand around the throat. We barely had time to breathe before trouble found us again. Reports came in of over 700 German troops pinned between converging American forces, cornered, desperate, and heading straight toward our position. Negotiations failed. They were coming in full force, a last gamble to break through. 40 of us. Hundreds of them. And nowhere left to run. They came at us like a storm breaking loose. 700 German troops pressed into a knot of desperation, driven by orders, fear, and the instinct to claw their way out of the trap closing around them. We had no illusions left. The bridge was gone, our trenches half collapsed, our ammunition already counted and rationed. 40 of us held the line, spaced so far apart that our voices barely carried from foxhole to foxhole. Still, we settled in like men preparing for the last chapter of a long book. I remember the silence before it began. A strange, heavy quiet, broken only by the rustle of reeds along the river and the metallic click of me chambering another round. Then the first shadows appeared between the trees, moving low, rushing forward. The battle exploded all at once, rifles cracking in a sharp rhythm, machine guns pounding like drums, grenades arcing through the dusk with trails of smoke. Our field of fire was perfect. They didn't know how well we had entrenched ourselves among the hedges and riverbanks. They expected scattered survivors. What they found was a firing line carved from stubbornness and mud. It was brutal and short. They charged in waves, but each one shattered against the weight of our position. Mortar shells burst against the far bank, lighting the night with orange flashes. Germans stumbled into barbed wire, fell into the channels, crawled forward only to be caught in crossfire. At one point, half a dozen tried flanking us through a ditch. I slid down the embankment, firing until my rifle hissed empty, then crawled through wet grass to grab ammunition from a dead paratrooper. We worked like machines, shouting directions, shifting fire, ignoring the growing ache in our arms and the taste of dust on our tongues. When the last shots faded, the field lay still. The smell of cordite and churned earth hung heavy. We had annihilated an entire battalion with fewer men than fit on a single truck. 40 against hundreds. I don't know if pride or disbelief hit me first. Maybe both. Maybe neither. All I felt was exhaustion so deep it hollowed me. But the war didn't pause for us, not even to let us breathe. Normandy was only the beginning. Soon we were loaded into trucks, sent north, then west, then east again. Market Garden needed men who could take bridges quickly. Holland's flat fields and narrow streets swallowed entire companies. Later, when the winter came with its iron grip, the Pathfinders called for us to jump into Bastogne. No reconnaissance, no photographs, barely any intelligence. Just a battered 101st holding a frozen town while German armor surrounded them like wolves circling a wounded deer. Each step forward took a piece from us. Each operation pared us down. Faces vanished. Names became memories. By autumn, our original roster felt like a ghost list. Most gone, some crippled, a few scattered across hospitals in England. I carried their absence with me heavier than my gear. Even so, we kept going. Because stopping meant thinking. And thinking was dangerous in a war where survival often depended on forgetting the cost. War teaches you that every victory is built on someone's bones. Every map line, every captured bridge, every successful operation, has a human price carved into it. I felt that most clearly when I started counting the men we'd lost. Not from reports, but from memory. Faces I'd shaved beside in England, men who had laughed at the rain, cursed the officers, shared cigarettes in the dark. One by one they were stripped away. Frenchy Baribeau was the first from our tight circle to go. A good man, quieter than most of us but deadly in a fight. He died in a field outside a Norman farmhouse, holding his rifle like he intended to keep shooting even after his last breath. I didn't hear his final words. No one did. All I knew was that when we pushed forward, he didn't rise with us. We marked his place with a helmet on a stick, then kept walking. Robert Cohn, our medic, disappeared next. He was snatched during a skirmish on a hedgerow path, dragged off by a German patrol while trying to treat a wounded paratrooper. For weeks we thought he'd been executed. Only later, much later, did word come that his captors had never noticed the small Jewish star he kept hidden in his boot. Somehow he survived the camps long enough to meet the liberation. When I learned that, I sat down on a crate and felt a weight lift that I didn't even know had grown inside me. Lieutenant Mellon lasted longer, though fate seemed determined to drag him down. He fought through Normandy wrapped in bandages, bleeding through his uniform. He kept going, shaking from pain, refusing evacuation. The last time I saw him, he was standing beside a crater, shouting orders with the stubborn fire that made us follow him. 2 days later, after the dust settled on another skirmish, we found him lying face down among broken branches, finally still. Some men die loud. Mellon died the way he lived, focused, unyielding, unafraid. By the time we left Normandy, only 2 of the original Filthy 13 still walked beside me. I felt like a lone survivor pulled from the wreckage of a burning aircraft. But then came a miracle so strange it felt like a story told by drunk soldiers around a fire. Piccadilly Willie Green, who we all believed had died in the exploding C-47, turned up alive. Thin as a wire, starved to 82 pounds, barely able to stand. He'd crawled through captivity and hell to reach us again. When I first saw him, bones showing through his skin, he still had that familiar crooked grin. It made something in me crack. Then Bastogne carved deeper scars. Jack Agnew, as tough as any man I'd known, was hit again, shrapnel tearing into him during one of those freezing nights when German artillery turned the forests into splintered mazes. Yet even wounded, he fought like a man determined not to let the winter swallow us whole. Through all of them, through death, endurance, and the quiet tragedies no report ever recorded, the war stopped being a grand cause or a list of objectives. It became human. Painfully, intimately human. And standing in that truth, I finally understood something no briefing ever said aloud. We weren't fighting for nations or strategies or glory. We were fighting for the men beside us, and for the stubborn hope that at least a few of us would live long enough to walk away from the ruins. There were moments in the war when time seemed to knot itself into a single, unbreakable thread. Moments when everything narrowed to one choice, one bridge, one riverbank, one heartbeat. Normandy gave us the first of those. The 3-day stand at the Douve was our crucible, the place where our unit was cut in half yet still accomplished everything the maps demanded. We held the bridge until our own aircraft came screaming in and blew it apart, wiping out the last hope of a German armored counterstroke. When I looked at the shattered beams steaming in the river, I understood something simple and cruel. Success didn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looked like survival in a field of wreckage. Then Holland came, and with it the strangest blend of triumph and futility I'd ever felt. Market Garden was supposed to be bold, brilliant, decisive. Instead it felt like a race where the finish line kept shifting. Eindhoven's bridges were our task, and we seized them in 36 hours, 6 days ahead of schedule. I remember running across those planks under sniper fire, hearing bullets crack off railings, shouting for the men to spread out. When the last charge was disarmed and the last street secured, I thought we'd turn the tide of the whole operation. But farther north, Arnhem collapsed. Paratroopers fought themselves into the ground and were swallowed by German armor. We had done our part flawlessly, yet the larger plan unraveled. That was when I stopped believing in master strategies. War was a machine with missing gears. You pushed where you could, prayed the rest held. Bastogne was different. Bastogne was winter carved into bone. The Pathfinders asked us to jump into a sky heavy with snow, without maps or photographs, without certainty the drop zone wasn't already crawling with Germans. I remember stepping into that icy dark, feeling the wind tear at my face, wondering if this was the jump that would scatter us into nothing. But we landed, God knows how, and found the 101st ring by steel and fire. The town was encircled, cut off, starving for supplies. Our job was simple and terrifying. Mark the drop zone so the lifeline could find its way in. Ammunition, food, plasma, blankets, everything the division needed to hold on. When the first planes roared overhead and crates thumped into the snow, I felt a surge of pride deeper than anything in Normandy or Holland. We weren't storming a bridge or blowing a target. We were keeping an army alive. The outcomes were plain enough on paper. Bridges destroyed. Bridges captured. Battalions broken. Towns saved. But every tally hid the truth. Each achievement cost men we couldn't replace. By the time the bulge receded and the snow began to melt, I felt hollowed out, as if the war had scooped pieces from me with every operation. Victory was always paired with absence. Names never answered at roll call, empty cots in frozen barns, letters returned unopened. Yet we kept moving because stopping meant acknowledging how much we'd lost. And in those months, I realized the war's climax wasn't a single event. It was the slow, grinding revelation that there was no turning back, that whatever we had become out there in the mud and snow, we would carry it long after the guns fell silent.